This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
Bob Welch is an author. He's been quite busy, over 22 books published, written articles across the publication plane. You've no doubt, if you're interested in military history, read his work or seen his name. His latest book is Saving My Enemy, How Two World War II Soldiers Fought Against Each Other and later forged a friendship that saved their lives. Welch is a best-selling author, co-authoring with Sergeant Don Malarkey of Easy Company Soldiers. So it was interesting when I heard that he is out pitching his book. I wanted to get on board to interview. And Bob, welcome. I assume you're in the great state of Oregon from what I read in your bio. How's the weather there?
You know what? It is cloudless and it is not raining, which is not usual for us, Tom. But anyway, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there is a structured way when you have a talk show to get into, and we'll make a YouTube video of this and spread the word to purchase your book and support your other books. And we'll put the links on it. You betcha. And you can, and I know that you're not getting rich from these things. It's one of those labor of loves. And if you can make a buck or two, good. I'll help. I'll be the first to help. And I'll buy a book as well when I see ones of interest.
Too.
Yeah, no, and I'll give one to my dad. I know he'll dig it. And we just heard from a former Army Ranger, once a Ranger, always a Ranger, Mike from the Valley out here in Alaska, who's from Oregon, and he was when he called in on a different matter, but said he'd listen. And I know we'll have a lot of people enthused by this. Let's get into first, rather than say, what made you write the book? And tell me about the two soldiers. We'll get into that detail, if you can do two segments particularly. But let's talk about you real quick and what inspired you? Little Bobby Welch decides to write when, and then how did you get into it? Were you trained? Did you go to college and get an English degree? Did you start writing for a magazine? What's your origin story? And then how did you get into, you know what, I'm going to talk about military and soldiers because I dig that particularly.
Okay, well, I'm that kid in fifth grade who on career day, if you could go hang out in a library, if you wanted to be a librarian, or if you wanted to go to the grocery store, if you wanted to, do that, I asked to go interview the Oregon State University basketball coach here in Corvallis. I wanted to be a writer, and that's exactly what I did. I went to journalism school at the University of Oregon. I became a sports editor of a small paper, then became a columnist and features editor in Bellevue, Washington, and then wound up in Eugene, Oregon at the Register Guard as a columnist. And I've always just loved to write. It's the only thing I know how to do. I can't change my oil. I can't build things, but I can write. And then, as a newspaper guy, I had the privilege of interviewing hundreds of soldiers over the literally decades. And then in early 2000s, I wrote a book called American Nightingale about the first nurse to die after the landings at Normandy, and that led to my agent getting me a gig writing Don Malarkey's memoir, Easy Company Soldier. He was one of the Band of Brothers, made famous by the Spielberg-Hanks HBO series back in 2001. And so I got to know Don very well in 2007 and interviewed him dozens of times in his basement here in Salem, Oregon. And at one point he mentioned to me, he said, the crazy thing is, I met this German soldier after the war. And I remember at the time we were pressing to meet our deadline and get his memoir done. And I remember sort of passing him off with oh, that's nice. Okay, let's get on and finish your memoir, Don. And then 10 years later, his daughter, after Don had died, he died in 2017, his daughter met with me and said, there is another book here. And because late in Dad's life, 60 years after the Battle of the Bulge, in fact, he met a German soldier. And not only did they become friends, but they wound up sort of healing each other's wounds. They forgave each other. They just both were racked with PTSD. Fritz Engelbert for having served Hitler, Don Malarkey for having killed so many German soldiers, including a 16-year-old. And in this moment in Bastogne, they come together and over a couple of beers just forged this friendship that really kind of saved their lives.
It's impressive to me that you were able to not, and that's because of your friendship, I think. I think when an author is able to endear himself genuinely, not manipulatively, into a potential interviewee, the subject matter of a story, that subject matter's family, like you did, these are the jewels, the rewards from it. And I'm glad that you took note and decided to continue. And, in terms of his legacy and kind of the unfolding of other events, in terms of Malarkey, and I'm just going to ask Engelbert and Malarkey, I mean, so were these guys friends till death?
Oh yeah, they were. They met on 3 occasions, all in Europe. First, of course, was the 60-year anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge when they first met, and that was interesting because Engelbert did not want to be there. I mean, a current-day sergeant in the Army, he wanted something to inspire his folks in Germany, and so he found a way to get 6 of the band of brothers to come to Germany to meet with his folks. And then he said, "Hey, why don't we invite a couple of Germans?" To which some of the band of brothers said, "What? These are the enemies. You don't have a Super Bowl party and then invite the team that you beat, right?"
Sure.
But anyway, Fritz Engelbert gets this invitation. He does not want to be there. These are not only the guys that beat Germany in World War II, but these are now movie stars, the band of brothers. He wants nothing to do with them, but his son has seen that his father is not healing from the war after 6 decades, and he says, "Papa, maybe this will help you heal." And so he shows up at this pub, and it goes badly from the get-go. Bill Garnier, who is a little bit on the abrasive side, one of the band of brothers, he looks at Fritz Engelbert, and he says, "Fritzy, it's a good thing I didn't meet you 60 years ago. Otherwise, I would have killed you."
Oh, boy.
That is not what Fritz Engelbert needed to hear. And he literally is pushing his chair out, getting ready to leave, when Don Malarkey hoists a beer in the air and says, "To the newest member of the band of brothers, Fritz Engelbert, welcome."
Wow.
And in that moment, all of the hatred falls aside, and there is potential for this friendship, which they do develop over the next day and then a couple of more meetings.
And if you can give a nutshell, we're talking about Bob Welch, if you, author of so many books, but this is one where you obviously have the Malarkey story ingrained in you. He's a friend of yours and passed away, as you mentioned, in 2017. You're still a friend with his family. But can you give a nutshell of who he is so people get the gist? Because some may be catching up and not having read your book,
Sure.
Not understand the magnitude of what he did and his charisma and stature.
Yeah. Malarkey grew up in Astoria, Oregon, went to the University of Oregon, went off and became part of the E Company of the 506th Regiment, 101st Airborne. He spent more days on the front line than anybody in the unit. He parachuted into Normandy on D-Day behind the lines. He parachuted into Holland, and they were just relaxing and finally getting some downtime when, of course, the Battle of the Bulge broke out. So Malarkey is a tough, grizzled, and by the time they get to Bastogne, a tired and shell-shocked soldier. He, at one point, after he's seen 2 buddies' legs blown off and his best friend killed, he literally has his hand on a pistol in his pocket and thinks, "You know what? If I just accidentally pull that trigger and shoot myself in the foot, I'm out of this hell. I get to go home." And he considers it, but then he looks around the fire and he sees these other men, and the leadership has already been decimated, and he realizes they need me. If I go, it's good for me, but it's bad for them, so he stays. So he was heroic, he was tough, and yet deep inside he was very tender. And that's why after the war, he couldn't just move on. It bothered him. He said, every night I'd go out for a drink, and in the bottom of my glass of scotch, I could see the see the faces of every soldier I left in Best.
Oh, boy. Bob Welch is his name. We're going to dig deeper into Saving My Enemy, his latest book, how two World War II soldiers fought against each other, and you just heard it, later forged a friendship that saved their lives. Stay with us. Tom Anderson Show.
This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
Well, releasing today, so it's quite an honor to have Bob Welch here. I know his time is valuable as he interviews across the nation. Here's a clip. Guilt nearly killed one of the celebrated Band of Brothers members, Sergeant Don Malarkey. He was a hero for his service in World War II, especially in the Battle of the Bulge. Yet he came to the brink of suicide, haunted by the memories of the German soldiers he killed. Across the ocean, Fritz Engelbert was shackled in shame for having been a pawn of Hitler. He too had fought in the Battle of the Bulge, but for the Germans, he couldn't find peace. Bob's book, Saving My Enemy, is the touching true story of these two soldiers on opposite sides of the ocean and of World War II. And they have an unlikely friendship forged in their 80s, dissolved 6 decades of guilt and shame that had pushed both men to despair. And we left Bob, the author of this awesome book coming out today, which I'm going to buy. Rick just said he's going to purchase, and I encourage you to do the same. Bob will tell us how. I encourage you to read it. Bob, let's get into the sales part, the marketing part of this. What's the easiest way? I'm suspecting you're going to say Amazon and your website and Regnery.
You got her.
Yep.
It's hard to beat Amazon. I mean, if you have an independent bookstore, see if they'll order it for you if you can get it. But the brick and mortar stores are kind of falling by the wayside. So a lot of people just go to Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and purchase it that way.
Yeah, and Regnery and your team, I tell you, they're awesome. Kylie, who connected me to you, she's a doll and she's smart and she's always so helpful. And I'm proud of them for what they do. And they're folks that in the cancel culture,
great to work with.
Yep.
They really have been.
Yep, they've stepped up. They've grabbed books that were canceled, and Hawley and others that Senator Hawley, and I hope to get him on soon. We interviewed Ted Cruz, who's had the same bashing, U.S. Senator from Texas. Listen, Bob. This is so compelling. It's one of the reasons I want to read it. I think it's a great gift for Mother's Day and for Father's Day. I'm not going to be gender specific here. I think ladies out there listening dig this storyline and this history, and the Battle of the Bulge in and of itself is such a big deal. One of my favorite, not in terms of fatality and the dark side of it, but in terms of war history, one of my favorite to read and talk about. These guys were plagued with guilt, deep guilt. And, it's the PTSD element that we viscerally see after the Vietnam War, less so Korean, very less in the World War II or World War I, or Civil War. I mean, people just didn't look at that psychologically. Do you think this book helps that? Does it shine a light on PTSD and what these poor fellows went through when we didn't classify it or help them?
Yeah, I think we have a bit of a sugar-coated view of World War II, that everybody came home and bought a house in the suburbs and lived happily ever after. But the reality is these guys were, they'd seen a lot, they'd felt a lot, but they had no way to process any of it because they basically were told, go home, start your lives, and don't talk about what happened. And so they stuffed a lot of stuff. It wasn't until the 70s, of course, that PTSD even was known because of Vietnam. But so while Malarkey's going through his stuff, and basically he turned to the bottle, Fritz Engelbert in Germany is brooding and quiet and angry because he feels like he'd been a pawn of Adolf Hitler. He was a Hitler Youth kid, age 10. That was his life. He grew up just absolutely passionate about serving the fervor. And And then after the war, he realized he had been duped, that this great man who promised so much wasn't what he came across as being, and so he turned very. He went to the left politically. He didn't think that Germany should even rearm itself, and meanwhile, he lost himself in his job. A very quiet man who had bursts of anger at family parties where somebody would be regaling how great the German soldiers were, and he would just break down in tears. And so both men are struggling with this for literally 60 years. And then Bill Maloney, a sergeant in Iraq, he wants to do something to fill his soldiers with encouragement. They've been over there for a year. What could they do? And he gets this idea of bringing some of the Band of Brothers to Germany to meet with some of his soldiers to encourage them. And then at the last minute, he asks his contact, and how about if we invite some Germans? And of course, there was silence on the other end of the line. You just don't invite Germans to a reunion of American soldiers.
Sure.
But they did, and the rest, as they say, is history.
But I have relatives, my mom's side of the family, all German, and some of her relatives, her father was killed, ambulance driver, World War II, instantly. He was a businessman that didn't want to fight. And of course, within weeks, killed on the Russian front. So you can imagine how my grandma thought of Hitler and of the army and the intent there. And my mom, and who passed away in 2012, would be in her 80s now. I mean, it was very disappointing for them, and they lived in Berlin, and you can imagine the fallout after that. And it's reminiscent, your book, and the pain and the embarrassment and the humiliation, especially when you lose. And I know Japanese feel it as much. And that's, I think, part of the spirit of your book, which is contrition and discomfort, and how do you get past all that? And to that end, in your book, at some point, it's not about war, is it? Because at the midway point or someplace, and I'll be reading it and others will too, but I mean, it's not all about war and, hey, somebody got their leg shot off, or we moved here, or there's General Patton. It's not about that. It's more about the human condition. And that's what I think makes it even more compelling.
Yeah, I think that in some ways, it's the rare war story with a happy ending, but in some ways it's a peace story too. Not only, peace in a personal sense, in the sense that both these men, once they got out of the war, they were searching for this elusive peace, and they ultimately could only find it in each other, in forgiving each other, in Fritz saying to Don, you only did what your country told you to do, and Don basically saying to Fritz, you had no choice. You were in Hitler Youth. You had to do what you had to do. And so there's this mutual respect that they have for each other. And it is so strong that when they tour the cemetery in Luxembourg, when they go to Jack's Woods in Bastogne, where much of the Battle of the Bulge was fought, they are like a couple of school kids on a field trip. They hang out with each other all day long. Even though there's some other German soldiers, the German soldiers don't clump together. Instead, it's Don and Fritz. And their sons, who were there, said, I've never seen anything like it. I haven't seen my father smile like that in forever. And so that evening, of course, when they get together and with Matthias, Fritz's son, doing the interpretation, they get to know each other. That forges the friendship. And then they meet two more times in the years to come. One which involves the entire Malarkey family, Don's family, coming to Bastogne and meeting the Engelbert family. So this is uncomfortable stuff. Let's just get two giant families together, one American, one German. Your father tried to kill my father, and vice versa, and let's just see if it works. Well, it works amazingly, and in fact, Don's daughter, Marion, is now extremely close friends with Fritz's two sons, Matthias and Volker, and she invited those two to Portland in 2017 for an easy company soldier. A reunion. Didn't tell anybody, didn't ask permission, just invited them, and they were warmly accepted. And so the the legacy goes on, the story goes on, that if we can at least sit down and have even a modicum of respect for each other, maybe we can get beyond the differences that we have as human beings. And I think that there's a lesson for us in America today. I mean, let's face it, we're fighting the worst Cold War of our existence. The left and the right have got some deep hate for one another, and yet at some point, even if we don't disagree or agree with each other, even if we might not like each other, we have to find a way to dialogue. And I think these guys sort of set a pattern on how we can do that.
They absolutely did. The sentiment is what we need more than ever. I encourage you. It just released today. Bob honored us by coming on the Tom Anderson Show. The book is Saving My Enemy, How Two World War II Soldiers Fought Against Each Other and Later Forged a Friendship That Saved Their Lives. You can purchase it at Regnery, at Amazon, at bookstores. Bob Welch, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to great sales and looking forward to reading your book.
Tom, thank you so much. It's been an honor to be on the show.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, it's released today, Saving My Enemy. Purchase it. We'll put the link in our YouTube channel and on our podcast. It's the Tom Anderson Show.